How do you keep that military intact after this cycle runs its course? How do you keep the technology intact after this cycle runs it, and you still want to be in charge of the money supply, in control of the money supply, in control of the internet, in control of all these systems after this cycle resets and an enormous amount of people are disrupted? That's what I'm talking about. You're going to try to, as an elite class, they're going to try to ride on top of this, still maintain the power, self-destruct some areas that would be beneficial to swing and move different economic systems or actual physical commodities to different parts of the planet perceived as safe zones.
It's not just gas stoves. Remember, now the Biden admin rule would outlaw nearly all portable gas generators, according to the Washington Free Beacon. It says a proposed Consumer Product Safety Commission rule limits the amount of carbon monoxide a product can emit, with the commission admitting that 95% of portable gas generators on the market cannot comply with this new standard. Now, many of these headlines are just a distraction, according to today's guest. He's known for his wildly popular YouTube channel, Adapt 2030, the Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast, also a frequent guest on Mike Adams' Natural News, has a program on Brighteon that airs on Fridays, among many other things. So, David Devine, thanks so much for being with me today. We have a lot to dive into. Like I said, some of these headlines that play on our emotions, I think they're important to hear and stay on top of. But at the end of the day, you say there's a much bigger picture that we're missing, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of distraction going on right now, so much so that it's overwhelming. You know, each of these series of articles that we see, and it doesn't matter if it's from the economy or from the military or from politics, this would be, a once in a decade type of story that we would have seen, decades in the past, but now it's occurring every week, and then they run with the news cycle of it. So it's a new, multi-year story that would be in the annals of history, written down for all to remember on how big of an event it was every single week now. But then it's layer on top of layer of that. So the distraction is at the highest point, and then swinging in with some of these natural events that we're seeing, quote unquote, science. I look at this and they're trying to take away our food supply. They talk about, methane, this, gas stoves, propane, but there were 100 million bison, 100 million in the United States during the Little Ice Age. So to come out with a straight face and say, well, 1650 to approximately 1720, if you look a little further back in cycles, you can start to see that things don't add up with the science, but the distractions there to keep you a little unprepared and infighting, so you're not really pointing at the monster that you should be.
And I mean, that is the most important thing that you're doing, is you're really trying to educate people so that they can be prepared. I mean, it is beyond time for people to prepare and be able to independently provide themselves and their families with food through gardening, et cetera. Because we have some changes. We hear a lot about climate change, but that's probably not to be confused with electromagnetic earth changes that you have been trying to sound the alarm on. I know through your channel. The first thing up, this earth change that you have timelined to happen through October 2024. Is that first up what we should be watching for?
now on with the video.
Well, it is, but the massive changes that we're starting to see now are natural changes. I could put a temperature station in the middle of a parking lot and give you the hottest temperature in a city also. I could put a temperature station at the end of an airport takeoff or landing runway area, taxi runway area, and give you a record temperature anytime I wanted to. And that's exactly where these temperature stations have been moved to. So when you start to look at this, the human blame is all-encompassing. It has to be. Because if you understand even a fraction that is a natural cycle, like they're talking about El Nino now coming on strong. Well, they're admitting that at least part of when temperatures are increasing and decreasing through the El Nino and La Nina cycle are natural driven cycles. So they're sort of letting the little bit of the true information out in terms of it is natural. But to control you and house you in cities and control what you can consume, where you can move, what you can buy, what types of jobs you can have, they need to have an excuse for this. And this is where it comes into these electromagnetic changes. If you knew there was a once in a 2,000-year cycle at our doorstep now that what is considered global warming and climate change extremes across the planet were from this natural cycle, had nothing to do with you, not CO2, it's the sun. In a mappable cycle of low solar activity that affects the jet streams in the cloud cells, and that will determine our ability on this planet to be able to grow enough food for 8 billion people or not. And why did they come at the depopulation agenda right now when we're not going to be able to grow as much food with these same cloud cells shifting?
And so this is all tied to the efforts that we see that make it seem that they want to depopulate is because they don't think we'll be able to handle this event?
Hungry people do strange things. You've seen through history, governments have been toppled by hungry people. So if you knew you could grow this much food, but the population was much wider, then how would you handle that? Because hungry people truly are undeterminable what their actions will be. Now, they've studied for 100 years the stimulus on a human. You put this stimulus in, and generally the response coming out will be this. Mapped over time, but the only thing that always throws a curveball in there, and there's like ones of thousands of choices and they never know what it will be, is when people become malnourished, not enough minerals and trace minerals, especially in the brain, to allow that to function cognitively. And when people get hungry, they do strange things, especially if they need to feed their children. So in a normal day of stimulus, you could expect the person would do this. But when we come into famine, wow, this is the most dangerous thing for rulers of countries and those at a global level of what they consider themselves as purveyors of narrative across the planet. You can't control hungry people. So you have one of two choices. You're either going to have to grow more food or keep the food coming in or depopulate as the food production across the planet starts to decline. And you know what? We're at a decline state right now in food production. Look at the wheat production across the United States now. Suddenly there's not enough soybean. They were 5% down on soy planting. Magic. Oh, they have all these numbers of what was intended for planting, and suddenly they just lost 5% of the entire soybean crop, just didn't get planted. Like, how does this happen? Drought across the general areas that we grow corn, spiking in price, and we jump over to Europe, they're in a drought. We jump over to the grain corridor being shut across the Ukraine. That is a huge breadbasket. Whoever controls that breadbasket will absolutely control the next century with access to the food. And I might add, Kazakhstan is another breadbasket. A lot of eyes are on and trying to move the chess pieces to control that. But look how much grain has been lost. Now, if we go to just a physical event, a volcanic eruption, the Hungatonga eruption in 2022, January, ozone is being depleted at a rapid rate because you have to look at this ejecta here. This volcanic eruption, if you hadn't seen it in the news, it was there for a day or two. It was one of the largest eruptions in 200 years, and it got 2 days of airplay. This shot so much water up into the atmosphere that it went up 180,000 feet. And when it gets up to this mesosphere, these little ice crystals are where ozone can jump on top of that and break down. So there's going to be a massive, catastrophic runaway ozone depletion event. And I think I sent a graphic there comparing pre-eruption with what we're seeing right now in terms of the ozone column. So the darker it is, the darker blue it is, it means you're going down in ozone in the concentrations of Dobson units. The higher the yellows, the reds, that's what we want to see because there's more ozone. But this is the comparison. On the left was before the eruption that sent all the ice crystals into the mesosphere. So what we're seeing right now, this is just going to continue because the max general ozone hole wideness and width, or the widest column emptiness, occurs somewhere around October, late September, early October. But you can see how many months ahead this already is in depletion. So one thing to take away from this, barley crops do not do well when they are at higher elevation and hit more by UVB radiation. Generally 30 to 40% losses in crops is what you would expect in the high UVB radiation areas. Insect life will be greatly affected. And then just plants themselves, the physiology, they don't like to be pounded by UVB radiation. You don't either. Humans are going to be affected. Going outside, you remember in Australia when they're like, put the hat on, put the sunscreen, as soon as you put your finger out, it's going to burn off. It will literally be like that again coming up. So food production losses inbound, especially for the southern hemisphere, in addition to what we're already losing in the northern hemisphere. And if we have an equal global total that needs to eat every day, and they're not going to have enough food, we got a big problem here. So how are these parasite class handling this? Well, you can see in front of you every day in the news feeds. That's how they're handling it.
Yeah, it doesn't all add up. But before we move on to digging a little deeper on that, I know you have some graphics that show what you were saying about what's actually naturally happening in the 2,000-year cycle that was last seen in 79 AD and what is happening now and how that relates to all this. Wanted to take a look at that again. So can you explain what we're seeing here and how this relates to what we can expect coming at us?
Yeah, there's a couple of different events that will occur when this second magnetic field interlooping, interplaying toroid field of magnetism between Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter, and Neptune. On the left side, what you're going to see is how the planets were in their orbits in the year 79 AD. On the right side, what we're seeing is slightly off. I wish I could have tilted it the exact same, but we'll see this coming in October of 2024. So it's 1 degree arc minute out of the 360 degrees off. So it's the closest that we've ever seen in the last, say, 2,000 years. You have to go back to about 4,700 years to find something similar. So again, you're looking at multi-thousand year cycles. So as this sets up, the Earth is going to have to pass through the sun, which is our normal, regular magnetic field that gives us our north and south poles. But then we're going to have a second magnetic field out in the outer solar system that's interlooping and interplaying on itself. Now, it's not going to be as strong. It's going to be a lighter version of. So there's two possible variables that will happen. We're either going to roll through both magnetic fields, and as you hit this looping point, it's called the block wall, where there's some effect where it creates a 0 point in magnetism. Now, however long the Earth would stay in that, our brains would be affected. The physiology of our physical lobes of our brains would respond to that no magnetic field state. And as I was talking to somebody else who understands gravity at a much greater degree than myself, says, the lunar or the moon, the lunar cycles that drive our tides, if there's a second magnetic field out there, it could possibly set up as a second lunar tide source as well, amplifying to look in coastal regions where, unknown on how many days or months, weeks coming into this apex period or the highest disturbance in the magnetic field, what would it do to the tides on our planet? Would it double them? Would it triple them? Would it 10x? And he's like, literally, if the tide was 10 times higher just for 2 days on either side of this event, that would destroy coastal infrastructure. It would set back our civilization just on the amount of damage from the tides, not tidal waves, tides, based on a second magnetic or gravitational body out in the solar system interlooping on itself. So irregardless of what it is, there's something big coming, and you can see all the distractions right now people being pitted against people, race against race, country against country, political party against political party, neighbor against neighbor. They don't want you to come together. So that's the whole thing I'm starting to realize now, is that we are never meant to come together to ride through this cycle, because if we did, we would be much more powerful to shake off the reins of this control that we've seen. The new energies are coming through, especially with Aquarius. Of those of you who follow the precession of the equinoxes, we've officially entered Aquarius back in 2020. It's a faster energy. So faster energies require new systems. The old systems of monetary control from the 1600s just don't fit anymore. We're going to have to come to new monetary systems. Suddenly there's cryptocurrencies. Suddenly there's central bank digital currencies. Everything's moving faster, the light of speed with the supply chains, the intercommunication between everyone. But now that it's so light speed, it needs to be controlled, because that information is going to move so much faster, and we can discern what is truth or lies at a much greater level now. So I think a lot of the distraction and noise that's out there, this interference pattern, as I like to call it, is to really just blast so much interference out there that's confusing and overwhelming for most people. So that they're going to focus on this or that versus looking at the sun, which we always did. These last, how many, 8, 10, 12,000 years? We've always looked at the sun to give us life on this planet. They always looked at the sun as the driver of cycles, the driver of famines, the driver of floods, the driver of golden ages where climate was stable enough where you could predict the planting and the harvesting dates. Well, that is all going out the window now. These plant dates and harvest dates are thrown out of kilter, and we're starting to see it with the crop yield numbers, and it's going to be lower than last year. So for sure, there's going to be a decline in global production of foods, or a lot of it's animal feed. So why is the demonization of all the animals that we use for our foods, from chickens to pig to cows? Well, you have to have an excuse why you can't have as many animals, because if you don't have as much animal food, you can't have as many animals. But you can't come out and say, well, we need to cut the cattle production and the dairy production because we can't grow enough dent corn out there, and actually we need to use it for other products too, like ethanol, and get it into people's mouths. We just don't have enough for all of it anymore. One of those in the equation needs to cut. And everybody's seen that famous Bill Gates, so you got to cut to 15% of the population. Well, they're starting with human input on our food supply first. And I think that's, once you start to connect a few of these dots, it makes a much wider picture when you're talking in terms of cycles, natural cycles that cannot be controlled and they cannot be taxed. But those riding on the coattails are just holding on in the hurricane, hoping that they can get through this to retain control and power on the other side.
Now, in particular with this date of things lining up like they haven't lined up in a couple thousand years, and creating some different environmental impacts, you say that we're going to see the first signs of this in October of this year, which is awfully close to
2024.
October 2024, which is awfully close to the election. Do you see this playing into whether or not we have a presidential election?
Well, think about the amount of chaos that would unveil itself during these changes. Now, one thing you can expect also is more volcanism, more volcanoes going off. And with the amount of natural earth changes coming in addition to what could be pushed or pulled as an economic crisis, an economic collapse, whatever it would be, to bring us into this new digital system, central bank digital currency issuance, the new BRICS trading bloc backed by gold and this sort of thing, the shift is on right now and we can see it. So what's going to be used as the catalyst to cover the next set of natural events is more the question. And I would agree, coming up to the election, what so many analysts are saying, no, we're not going to have an election. It will be delayed. Like Zelensky, they did away with the elections in the Ukraine this year. So what's from our government stopping the election cycle? No, things are too tumultuous. But is it the natural cycle that's going to make it so tumultuous that our daily lives will be disrupted to the point where we'll have to grow our own foods? We'll have to get with our communities to try to solve a lot more problems in terms of daily use things, repair, that sort of thing? Or is it going to be because the economy collapsed, because yellow trucking went out of business and they couldn't, pay their what's that, with the unions, the different insurance, and they cut off, and their transportation hubs are being auctioned off on the real estate now. I think that's happening on Monday. UPS going on strike. I mean, everywhere you look, there's something that's taken out the supply chain. So in the grander scheme of things, all these little excuses are adding up to something very large. But what is it that's cascading to the point where all these little things need to be put in front of the public continuously to explain away something? What is it that's being masked? Or is it being ridden on top of to create a greater effect? Because if you look at this, all these things that we see geopolitically, economically happening right now seem to have like precision timing on them to overlay on top of crop forecasts, release dates for the harvests that are coming out, the new contracts for outbound grain shipments, the conversion from gold. Oh, there's an announcement BRICS is going to absolutely go to a gold-backed currency. Some dollar drops on the dollar index. The whole thing. Now move it forward another whole year, and we start to see these massive changes in the climate system itself, where the food is going to get so expensive that'll cause societal unrest anyway and disruption. Through history, it already has. Now just take it out a couple more steps. Is the election being postponed or delayed or canceled because of extreme weather events? Or is it the extreme weather was going to be here anyway, and now we have the news cycle and these power brokers putting excuse and layering it on top, and now here's your big cake to eat at the same time. Let them eat cake. I think we're repeating a cycle again here.
Yeah. Well, I think before we dive into this next date of April 2025 and what you foresee happening then as a matter of natural environmental causes, I think we should just go ahead and take our break now. We're going to hear from our sponsors, and then when we get back, I want to talk about that. And I want to also clarify some things, because it gets confusing to me, the motivations and how they don't seem to line up when it comes to this elite class that we're talking about as we talk about these topics. Just some background. How did you get into this expertise for people that don't know? Like, who's this guy? Like, is he a scientist, or like, how does he know about this stuff? Like, so how do you respond to that as far as like your background being qualified to analyze what's happening in our space and how it's affecting the environment?
I used to buy coffee in Myanmar on the ground. 2012, when they were first opening up, in 2011 and 12. So we would buy coffee in what was formerly known as Burma, and then take it up into Taipei. And then from there, others would export it up to Japan. So what I learned there when we were buying was, when we started to buy, they said, by the way, you're going to get some cold leaf damage on there. They call it this leaf burn on the top of the plants where it gets too cold. The bean density would be affected by that, because when the beans freeze, they're going to have these little water pockets in there. And once they freeze solid, the bean doesn't regrow in and refill that back up. So you get microspherical pockets inside the bean. So the bean density is changed, and your roasters that are going to need to know that, depending on what their profiles are going to be. And plus the new plantings in the fields out there, the seedlings, you have to pre-buy your farm. And they'll allocate that for you once you buy some acreage, and they plant that for you. That's your acreage, especially if you're going to deal with them for 5 or more years. So they had to overplant by about 14%. So because the cold damage on the new seedlings would kill them off. And I was like, whoa, I understand that. Thank you for being very honest in your business practice there. I don't believe the cold thing. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. We're here in Burma, and you're talking about cold damage to the coffee crops. And I was trying to do a 5-year allocation, look out, see, could we expand production, all those things you do to try to grow your business. And they were telling us that in the 18, their great-great-grandfathers, the ones who were commercializing the crops down there in Burma at that time, now known as Myanmar, experienced the same thing. It was a cold period for some 10 years or more, that it wasn't reaching max production. They had some problems with it, but then after that, everything stabilized again. And I said, okay, that's interesting. So I started looking at the cycles, and there we go. And then I saw it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's the whole thing. See, the number one thing for me was, I was the biggest believer in global warming. I saw that Al Gore movie. I gobbled that thing up. I was like, this is crazy. The world's going to melt. I can't believe we got to do everything we can stop. And once I got down there and I saw that, I had to reach out to some people because it was just so, like, you ever have your reality that just bent and shattered to a point where the core rock belief suddenly just doesn't exist. And you're left out here going, how am I going to pick up the pieces to what I formerly thought was my brain? And I went from there and I found John Casey. So John, thank you.
Yeah, many of us have experienced that. For many, it was the pandemic situation that opened our eyes to, wow, all these things I thought I knew. Everything I knew, I think now is a lie. So it's crazy, but also so enlightening and empowering when you can start investigating and finding the truth. Now, we talked about what you're anticipating to happen in October of 2024 in space, this lineup that happens only every 2,000 years that can affect us magnetically, the magnetic field. And then you have this other date, April 2025, of what's going to happen. Did you want to take us through that?
Yeah, I wanted to respond just before we came on the break here. You were, trying to say, well, how do the elite? How does it affect them? Like, where do these two worlds mix with the elite and their power coming through this natural cycle and the distraction? We'll come at it from this standpoint here. These cycles occur about every 400 years, and once every 5 of those cycles, they line up into this larger, more powerful cycle. So within smaller cycles, like the gears on the back of a Swiss watch, there's heavier, more powerful cycles included in these smaller cycles. So I think we're coming up into one of those. Now, if you look back in history, about every 400 years, we have these collapses in what was, the height of architecture, mathematics, trade, etc. Every single of these chapters. And if you start tracing them back, and I did a lot of research back to the Homeric minimum, which is about 2,400 years prior. And I kept coming to this conclusion, the Tang Dynasty, and wherever you go where they had really good records, Persia especially, there was huge changes in the climate and there was massive shifts in society. And there's 3 things that always happen with this: population migration, economic resurgence after the collapse, and then there's a restructuring of governments. How governments oversee the citizens changes after that. So something happens to the point, and I do believe it is from the food that causes the toppling of governments. People leave, they migrate to go to better areas. You have to remember, 800 years ago, 400 years ago, 1,200 years ago, people would get actually on their carts, horses, or walk to different destinations for better life. If you couldn't grow it, there weren't supermarkets. There was no just-in-time delivery systems. Like, you literally had to leave with your belongings to go to another area where you would be able to eat. So you see massive population migrations during these periods. And again, the economy is greatly affected. And then the governments have to respond to angry citizens because they didn't keep their grain storage high enough or full enough. And now the citizenry is starving. And we see this chapter after chapter after chapter of history. And the elites understand this. Now, if you really get a greater understanding of the cycle, it can't be stopped.
But 2008 is when the system actually died and was put on QE life support till they could get into place the next system that will take the current system's place. And what I'm talking about is, like, back in 71, we went from a quasi-gold standard in August and the beginning of August of 1971 to a pure debt-based standard by the end of August and going into September. People didn't realize that anything had changed, when in reality everything had changed. And we're at that same juncture right now where everything has changed.
Absolutely. And to that point, Zoltan Posner of Credit Suisse actually has a paper out saying that the crisis that we saw in 1971, it's not even going to be anywhere near that. It's going to be way worse what we're experiencing today. But my question is, I was just observing, when I was outside the head office of UBS and I was looking at passerbys, and I was wondering, do you think that most people are even aware of what's happening and the repercussions?
No.
With rising inflation, bank failures, and massive layoffs across multiple sectors, the future of the economy remains uncertain. It's no wonder the central banks have been getting prepared by stockpiling gold. At ITM Trading, we have spent over 27 years building a team of seasoned researchers and analysts who can help you prepare for any financial crisis. Our experts are ready to provide you with proven strategies to safeguard your wealth and assets in the event of an economic downturn or currency reset, which is frankly inevitable. Don't wait until it's too late.
ITM Trading is a precious metals company that's been in business for over 27 years with the mission to educate and empower individuals to hedge against inflation, financial risk, and help you prepare for the Great Reset. Schedule your free gold and silver strategy call, 866-834-1422. That's 866-834-1422.
This is going to run its course whether you try to pay to bend a jet stream back with a global tax or not. This is an unstoppable cycle, always has been, always will be. It's just part of our planet. It's unstoppable. So you have to think about the damage that would be done. It's an unsalvageable point of our world now where the systems that used to exist, why do you think they're being cut at the vine right now, never to return? Because they're not going to survive through the collapse. And those in power understand that. So what they're trying to do is engineer as much collapse or holding on to power while a perceived collapse is happening, moving economic systems to different areas on the planet that might ride this out in a better fashion, might have a better chance of food production in some areas. So to restart an economy, to restart technology, to restart a civilization that has been badly damaged by a natural cycle and lack of food production where a large percentage of the planet just won't have enough food to get through this. That's what I'm talking about. Trying to rein on to the reins of power, grip it while we go through this natural cycle. That was going to self-destruct an enormous amount of our systems anyway. Because you got to look at the liquefaction events that occur, the volcanism that occurs. There's a lot of things in cities and areas on the coast and just things that wouldn't make it through this anyway, that would have to be abandoned or written down or written off. So that's what how do you keep that military intact after this cycle runs its course? How do you keep the technology intact after this cycle runs it? And you still want to be in charge of the money supply, in control of the money supply, in control of the internet, in control of all these systems after this cycle resets and an enormous amount of people are disrupted. That's what I'm talking about. You're going to try to, as an elite class, they're going to try to ride on top of this, still maintain the power, self-destruct some areas that would be beneficial to swing and move different economic systems or actual physical commodities to different parts of the planet perceived as safe zones. There's a couple of these. Republic of Georgia is one of them. Indonesia and Sumba Island would be another one. And you start to look at these and go, wow, a lot of these BRICS countries are suddenly in these same places here. North Africa is another one, an interesting one. North Africa could be set up as a new grain growing area with a double rotation crop. They would be drawing from the Nubian sandstone aquifer or the Sus aquifer beneath the groundwater resources as the above ground West African monsoon continues to dump more rain over what is the central Sahel area. Problem was there's too many fighting age men there that would be very upset if you came in to try to set up a grow zone and not share profits with them. Oh wait, they're elsewhere now, so don't worry about that. These areas that are going to be greatly affected or most affected would be 45 degrees north latitude and above, which takes most of Canada offline, parts of the United States, parts of Northern Europe, and a lot of Northern China, like Heirloom and that area offline. And if we look in the south part of the world as well, we see the same 40 to 45 degrees north latitude. So pretty much that latitude band and above and below, you need to strip it off as a zero production. Well, you're going to have to make that up somewhere if you want the world to eat. You're going to have to set up a new grain growing area. Oh, wait, look at Ukraine, how hotly contested it is. That is the number one breadbasket still that will retain a grow area that will not be so much affected by this. Those water bodies there, they have their microclimates. That's why Republic of Georgia, between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, were another zone that would be not so greatly affected. Kazakhstan, there are a lot of people are looking for that. So whoever can control the grains, this is way beyond oil now. Whoever controls the
Right.
food will survive through this for their populace to continue and set up this new system after. That's why everything's focused on 2030, because the time we ride through this, the rebuilding will occur around that time. So, start to match the dates that we see with the agendas, and it seems to follow this planetary magnetic anomaly to the T, with the start, the finish, and then the restructuring.
So that part makes sense. You're giving me a motivation as far as like Ukraine. I mean, I think there's other motivations as well that have been made clear. But as a longtime journalist, I'm constantly searching and questioning the conflicts of interest at play and the motivations. And for me, it's hard to wrap my mind around, okay, there's this elite class that knows that this thing is going to happen. They're keeping it from people. But it's just another one of those cases that it's just like, it doesn't add up for me in terms of why did they choose to do things that can turn around and hurt them, in my mind, because it's like if they know that this is coming and that it's going to affect food production and the availability of food, why would they attack the ability to have food available so aggressively? I mean, that seems like it would just turn around and hurt them even more, even if they do have plans of like, or backup plans of, oh, well, we're going to get our food from here. It just, I mean, and even when with the whole pandemic situation, there's so many of these policies that is just like, what, do they really think that they're going to be immune to the negative impacts of these decisions? I mean, is that the arrogancy at play? So sometimes I struggle with that. Did you want to address that?
Yeah, they can't hide it from people. So that's the whole thing. They can't hide it. It's you're seeing it, manifest in front of you. So there was already this excuse built into called global warming. Like they understood, and those who understand these cycles, and it is pretty much every government at this point that is part of this obfuscation, because if you look, the world's moving like a school of fish now, and COVID was it. Everything moved at the same time. Everything is moving back again right now with the climate. So COVID was just swapped out, and now it's the climate. So what is it? You can't hide the changes from everybody because they see it with their own eyes. Now it has to be a narrative built in. So, how clever was that to go from, well, we're going to see some of these changes coming in. We're going to call it global warming. Oh, wait, it's going to be climate change. And how much of that area is taken off where the average person can't go? The average company can't go into those food growing zones any longer. They will be picked and chosen to be able to access and be the producers of the food. And the outbound food production, from that point, that will be a centralized control of all food production, or a great amount of food production on the planet. If you think it's centralized right now with the seed companies and Syngenta and Monsanto and this sort of thing in the big ag industry, imagine who's going to be able to, in a global famine sense, be chosen to go in and refurbish parts of Ukraine and be the producers of those areas, the hand chosen, and where do those exports go to? See, that's another thing. Okay, those areas that will be grown, where does the export outbound go to? It's not going to be going to the unfriendly nations. And this is why so many militaries are trying to control the grain growing areas of the planet right now. And again, it's not the population that we're looking at right now. You have to look at a greatly reduced population when a lot of this is going to play out. Look at the damage being done right now with how many people are either being turned into invalids or just straight dying from what had happened over the last couple of years. This is going to accelerate off of a roller coaster, and systems just are going to quit functioning because they won't even have enough staff in there to keep the lights on. So a lot of these things playing out, you try to frame it in today's world of 7.5 billion people, or, however many are currently around after this last 3 years. But bring that down into something half that number. And then it starts to the numbers start to fit, and the amount of food production starts to fit. But who gets to grow the food and who gets to distribute the food? That's where the power elite come back in. They're going to control the grow zones again. And I hope I answered the question, and please keep prodding, because the ideas can definitely come out to explain it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole concept is obviously overwhelming, and you just want to be able to wrap your mind around it and understand, like, I mean, all I can figure at the end of the day is, I mean, obviously these people are very arrogant. They reject gods. They think they are gods, so they feel like they can accomplish all of these things even in the face of resistance. But there's also this other environmental event that you talk about happening in April of 2025, that on top of everything else, our planet could get pounded by space debris. Can you break that down for me?
After we come through the October of 2024, whatever that entails, second gravitational body that does, lunar effects and tide changes, or electromagnetic effects where disruption literally in the north-south pole, polar wander, and the human physiology is affected. After we come out of that, it'll be a strange time. We'll be like, whoa, we've just, survived this most strange of times. And as we pull around in front of the sun, there's nothing in front of us to pull away or magnetically attract any types of space debris at all. Everything is directly behind us. And as you see those yellow lines, it's almost like we're at the tip of the spear. And everything behind us, all the gas giants that normally tug a lot of space danger out of our way, are behind us, pulling it almost directly into the face of our planet during those months from April, May, and June. And as we swing around the back of the sun, finally, somewhere around September or October, if we talk about biblical references or just prophecy itself, there's an enormous amount of references to, hailstone, brimstone ripping through the sky and pounding the earth. As we come back around through that, magnetically, those four gas giants should have started to move around a little more, and they'll have more magnetic pull on a lot of that space debris. So it'll start to get diverted and pulled away from us as we come into like 2026. So it won't be nearly as bad in 2026 because the planets are going to continue in their orbits through those next year and a half after that event. So by the time we swing around the sun one time and we come in for the full next year in what is considered our year on our orbit for the planet, the electromagnetic mechanics will have changed greatly to that second field, will have dissipated, although we'll still have some effects like we are now, things amplifying, running into it. We'll have those same effects, but they'll be dissipating every day as we pass through 2024 into 25. And also the orbit of our planet, when we come around magnetically, those gas giants are going to start grabbing and tugging more of that debris. And I would encourage anybody out there to go to a website called SOT.net or thewatchers.news. They cover a lot of these different events for comets, space debris, meteorites, bolides, and the amount is just off the hook of larger amount of bolides and space debris coming through that are leaving long streaks in the sky and, exploding in the atmosphere where, then it'll have shock waves on the ground. Even some of them are reaching the ground now, and this is much more at a higher and intensified level, and a higher level than we've seen in the past, especially with the largeness and how long now they're dragging through the atmosphere and really being visible across so many continents, and just minute after minute, day after day, daytime sightings, let alone the nighttime sightings. And the size of them, it seems to be increasing along with the frequency of it as well. And that's just database. You can just see how many people report. There's a huge amount of sites that consolidate reports of, hey, I saw a shooting star. Hey, I saw a meteor. Hey, I saw something come in over my head. And then they try to triangulate by state or by area. And it does seem to be increasing. So, they call it the year of fire for a reason. I'm not talking Canadian wildfires. I'm talking about space debris coming in and those streaks behind, those tails being the fire described, I guess. Okay, that's the problem that we see, the buzz or the fuzz, as we call it, out here, this interference pattern. You need to get ready. Like, these complex systems are breaking down by the second, and as we come in with these strikes and more of, like I say, UPS and yellow that are going to even further break down our delivery systems into supermarkets, you're going to have to start getting more self-sufficient. And I would say just wind the clock back to say something 1860. Think about pioneering lifestyle. What were the basics that people did or had or knew how to do, or what kind of tools or what kind of implements they would have to be able to take care of themselves at the farming level, and then also that community around them? Because at the very base, taking care of your food needs, of being able to grow food and to store your own seeds after you bring them up through the season, in addition to storing water and being able to purify water, having some basic medical understanding. And, what did somebody in 1860 do for antibiotics? What did they do if somebody broke a bone? How did they raise their animals? Because it's great if you can grow vegetables, but what about a protein source? Have you raised any chickens? I mean, you go back to, I wish our grandparents were still around, people who lived through the Great Depression, because they had all the hacks and all the nicks and, ways and knacks that they could, make something out of nothing and solve a problem. Who makes their own camphor oil anymore? I mean, these guys, what's Grandpa doing? Oh, he's making camphor oil for us for the year. Like, oh, okay. But everybody knew how to do the basic skills and repair basic things. But it seems like we've lost that. We've been teased by the carrot to get on to somebody else will grow the food for you. Somebody else will do this for you. So we've gotten so reliant on supermarkets and this sort of thing that we've just lost the ability for the very basics for survival. And I think we're going to have to learn those really quickly. If you haven't, you're going to need to. And I'm sorry to say, kind of behind the curve on it right now if you don't have your gardens out this year, and at least learn from some of your mistakes.
Right. And I know that you're very passionate about that, and people can, again, follow you on Brighteon, listen to your show every Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern time, because you're passionate about making sure that people are prepared. I wanted to hit on, I only have a few more minutes with you, but we were talking about before we came on today, just the amount of these billionaires who have either died or there's CEOs that are stepping down. How does that play into everything else that we're seeing?
Yeah, look at the amount of people who have been complicit in the messaging for the narratives that we've seen, especially with the global warming and especially to inject into your body. So I'll leave those at the two big ones, but there's a lot of other ones that are in there. But the large corporations have always been in that narrative push. You don't become a CEO or a C-level if you're not in 100% in agreement with those company values, which are always more aligned, again, back to power brokers that have been around for moneyed families for thousands of years. That control of central banking and then that umbrella flow down from the banks to the corporations. If you're not at that level and in complete subservience with it and message pushing and narratives, once you've done your job as the actor on the stage, exit stage left. And what we see is an enormous amount of people disappearing right now. At the point, it just doesn't make sense. Okay, we had the COVID, a huge amount of businesses closed down. The messaging of those who were pushing, hey, go get your jabs, do this, do that, they're all disappearing too. It's like those who were involved in the greatest stage play that we've seen are now all exiting. Now, you might call that a golden parachute, but why is it that we see massive systems now with people are just disappearing? And we're looking at the exact same time of these same systems breaking down. Like there's no replacement to fill up those lost positions. So it's almost as if, all right, you've done your job, head off out to your country, get away. You can do your Zoom thing, and thanks for your participation, and then the company collapses. Well, it can't be like this. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies keep collapsing, and they're barely, like I say, keeping the lights on with minimal staff. And that's just the way our world's going to move forward, where no rebuilding is taking place at all. Like, look at the state of the world. Nothing's being rebuilt as it's being destroyed. It just keeps getting more destroyed and more weakened, and the next Jenga piece getting pulled out, and nothing is being restructured to help rebring. We're not even working on our infrastructure in America. But again, it comes back to the cycle. If you knew there's more volcanism and earthquakes, why would you repair the infrastructure if you knew it was going to be destroyed through natural cycle anyway? You start to look at them, okay, now it's starting to add up. And then the movie stars, of course, and the writers and everybody involved in the whole television Hollywood thing, they're all, where do they all go? They're all on strike. Okay, that's a perfect excuse for everybody to disappear. Militaries too. Imagine if there's a nuclear strike. Oh, everybody could disappear. Who would be left? I mean, where's everybody running to should be more the question. And all at the same time, while all of our systems are breaking down and nobody's lifting a finger to bring us back to the prior world. As I say, I really believe that the old world's being cut at the vine because it was never going to survive. So it's at the past. And those of you living in the past, trying to save the past, you got to think about now and building our new future versus trying to save the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are up against the clock. There's always so much more to cover, so we may have to have you on again and dig into one of these topics more fully. But we're so thankful that there's folks like you willing to dive in and research and figure out what's truly happening, because there are so many distractions coming at us. So just a reminder for folks, if they want to hear more and stay on top of this information with you, where should they go?
You can go to the Adapt 2030 channel. We run a live radio program 2 hours at a time, Revolution Radio, Thursday nights, Studio A. And again, Mike Adams' channel there. I do it Friday night or Friday afternoon, 2 to 3 p.m. And if you like podcasts, 30 minutes at a time, many Ice Age conversations with guests also delving into these problems, but also talking about the solutions. So, Christy, I appreciate you having me on. A lot to talk about, but hopefully everybody got something out of the video. Take with what you need, what you want, what do you want to do more research yourself, and then, that's going to be exclusive for you. And I wish you the best in your preparations, and bye for now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David Dubine. And like I said, we're going to have you back another time so we can dig even deeper. This is just such a huge information that you can't even pack it all into an hour. So we'll stay in touch with David Dubine, and obviously you can investigate further on your own and catch him on Brighteon